In this video, we start to understand some of the important issues that are related to administration of DW and BI projects. So this is part of chapter 17 of Sherman textbook. When we implement a BI project, we have focused quite a bit on the technical aspects of technology implementation. It's easy to fall into trap of concentrating all of our resources and efforts just on products and technology. That's also something known as technology trap. But the problem is that in order for a BI project to be successful, it's not just IT needs that need to be responded, but it's also an interaction between people, politics, and the processes that are involved in an implementation. So a lot of projects that are going to be implemented might be considered unsuccessful or failure simply because they don't meet the expectation of the people or the company or the department that has asked for these technologies. And here is an important consulting tip where it doesn't really matter how much we think we have delivered through a BI project. It always matters what the business or the customer or the client thinks about the project and the technology that we have put together. Now, there are some common reasons why a BI implementation might be considered a failure. One would be an unpopular situation. So maybe the business expected that a lot of other BI reports or dashboards or analytics be implemented, or maybe a lot of people who use it end up not liking or only using a small portion of the BI solution that has been provided. Another issue is sometimes the amount of effort that it requires from people to work with the analytics might be considered too much. Let's say you have a BI system that allows a lot of reports to be created on your own. We call them also self-service analytics. Now, if that's considered a little too difficult for people, that could create some challenge. Or sometimes we have information shortfall. So maybe some of the critical information that a client was expecting is not available, or it's not clean enough in order to be clearly used with a BI tool. Now, for your effort, for your BI project to be successful, that's why we need to do due diligence. We need to understand what it will realistically take to deploy what a business is expecting from us. We also need to set proper expectation right at the beginning and not at the end, because it doesn't matter if you push back at the beginning. People will understand, people will adapt to it, but if there's a lot of pushback at the end, that's where we will not be able to meet people's expectation. Now, in order to not fall into that trap, there are 5 important issues that we need to consider. First, the relationship between business and IT. Then business people, roles and responsibilities, either IT department or the business. We need to look at the BI team architecture. We also look at training, and finally we need to think about data governance. So let me provide a brief overview of each of these elements. And the first thing is that the interaction between IT department and business or any client like any other type of communication, is vulnerable to issues such as misinterpretation, poor communication, and disagreements. And these could be resulted by a few factors at least. First, we might have been putting too much stocks onto power users. Power users, we discussed them before. Those are people that are most involved in using data and technology for reporting and analytics. And it's natural that IT department would work closely with them when thinking about DW and BI, but sometimes dealing with these people might create a barrier where they might end up swaying the project into one direction that should not have happened, or sometimes they might ignore some important issues which will result in future clients not using the system or end up developing other shadow systems that will compete with our developed BI solution. Another reason would be wrong, or we say unmotivated people who may not be right for the project, or people who cannot influence decisions. Let's say when it comes to a steering committee who needs to approve the project or approve the budget, you might be working with people who cannot really deal with that, or they might even send wrong messages to the steering committee. So staffing is quite important, especially staffing from business people. And also there might be some issues with the feedback loop. So the formal process that should be created for providing feedback in a BI implementation either might not exist, or it might be too bureaucratic or too time consuming, that will lead to some people getting frustrated. Maybe their client might be frustrated, especially if they're requesting things that might take long to fulfill or might end up not being fulfilled. And again, that might lead to creation of some shadow systems, that something that vendors should try hard for that not to happen. So if I want to give some tips for better communication, we need to think about all of our customers, not just the power users. We need to make sure we do hire and recruit the right people who are motivated for the project. We want to create easy to use feedback loop. Clear and simple language should be used in communication. We need to be honest about the deliverables and the expectations and the requirements of the project. And if there are issues or there's a scope creep, when project is slipping up the schedule, we need to be upfront, we need to be honest, and we need to communicate that to the client. The other issue is about roles and responsibilities. In general, the role of IT department or the developer department is to manage the back office, meaning that you want to create the infrastructure, think about data integration, and provide the analytic tools that are required by business people. And on the other side, the role of the client is to manage the front office, basically using data and the tools that have been provided in order to create some reports and do the analytics that were intended from that BI project. Now, the issue is that sometimes you might find that people do not always fall very clearly into this category. So there's companies where the structure of the teams might be different. There might be some mix and match. And sometimes these blurred lines might actually end up creating some conflict. For instance, in some situation, you might be thinking of who is leading the project, who is setting priority, who might be pulling the project into a certain direction. And this is, again, another important issue that you need to think about, and that's essential throughout the entire life cycle of the project that you are managing. So if I just want to provide an overview of what business is responsible for, or the client side, they are responsible for the business events or transactions. For instance, sales, employee pay, website traffic. They need to think about the dimensions and attribute. They need to describe the events. For instance, products sold, who bought them, how many did they buy, how much profit they have earned for each sale. They need to think about hierarchy. When we say hierarchy, we're talking about hierarchy in terms of the dimensions. Let's say the geographics, let's say sales, organization, the product hierarchy, anything that's related to those. Think of the metrics, what would be the measurement, what do we need to monitor and evaluate in our business, and the business rules, anything that's related to selecting, filtering, aggregating data, and calculating the metrics, let's say using a certain KPI or formula. On the other hand, IT would be responsible for putting the data together for the BI tool. They need to think about the source system. So where is this data coming from? How are they going to get it? They do the data modeling again once they have the information from the client. They also put together data and information architecture and physical integration of data. And finally, it's IT who design and develop the infrastructure for the technology. Even if you're buying the technology from a vendor, the architecture should be put together by the IT department.